Welcome to part 2 of Nutnfancy's tabletop review of the outstanding Sig P226. When we left off in part 1, I was talking about the factory Sig 9mm magazines. And by the way, I think I failed to mention that the version I'm reviewing is the 9mm. It does come in 40 Smith, also 357. Both of those are outstanding cartridges. I can't say anything bad about either of them. I love them. This is the 9mm version, and I can't really say too much bad about the 9mm version either, unless, of course, you're stuck with using it with hollow points. If that's the case, and you're using it defensively and not just recreationally, then you better make your shots count. In other words, you better hit cranium or bone or aortic valves or something like that to shut down the CNS, because FMJs in the 9mm are like toothpicks, and they're pretty much worthless in my opinion. Now, if you put a regular expanding full metal jacket, high quality one, and there are lots out there, let me get rid of that for a sec. There's lots out there that give you options, and I'm talking about 9mm loads here. Then you're talking business. It can get the job done, and I feel that you are definitely not underpowered with a 9mm as long as you do your part in accuracy. Okay, that's just a little aside. Now, back to the firepower issue. These, again, are the factory, super high quality 20-round magazines. Slam that bad boy in. Yeah, it sticks out from the stock a little bit, from the butt of the gun, but you know what? So does a 33-rounder out of the Glock, and actually more than that. Now, it's not 33 rounds like the Glock 18 magazine is, which we can use in all 9mm versions of the Glock pistol. So, truthfully, the Sig still loses in firepower, truth be told. We're down 13 rounds, even with a 10-round magazine. But the beauty of this issue to me is that you have a factory-built 20-round magazine. How many pistols have that? There's not a lot out there where a factory supports and comes out with a magazine that you can pretty much bet your life on. There's a lot of hokey gun whatever the gun shop type of stuff that's just garbage, gun show magazines, which have dubious origins. You just don't know where they're made. I hate that stuff, and I've been burned by buying it in the years past, and I just don't do it anymore unless I know the magazine's name, where it came from, and there's only a few makers of magazines that I would trust. And bear with me as I go through this little aside. One, of course, the factory magazine. Trust that. I've introduced you in part 1 to the Mekgar magazine made in Italy. That's outstanding. Occasionally, you're going to find some LEO or military contract overrun magazines. And that's what this magazine is. This is a Sig 9mm magazine that was a military contract. I don't know the source of it, but I suspect it might be for the SEAL pistol. The reason I say that is when the ban was in existence, it's still stamped with that LEO limitation on it, which of course is no longer a player. But the owner tells me he picked up 5 of these at, actually I didn't even forget where he got it, if online or whatever. But this looks like a military magazine. It's phosphate coated on the exterior. And by the way, I don't know if you will see it coming up. I will review the M9 Beretta, and I have issues with some of the reliability issues of that gun were due in part to the phosphate coating, not on the outside, but on the inside of the magazine, which created resistance to the rolling rounds as they worked their way up the feed tube, and it just created jams. I'm looking for my little takedown tool because there's something I want to show you. I was going to take this magazine down and show you on the inside. So much stuff. Anyways, I have examined the inside of this magazine, and it's shiny. So that tells me that it's not a phosphate coat on the inside of it. Therefore, getting back to my point, I would trust this magazine. By the way, it is stamped Mekgar. See that? Right there. Mekgar, made in Italy. So, in reality, that's just another Mekgar magazine off a military overage. Probably from CDNN, that's what I'd expect. The only other one I'd really add to the mix, and some of you guys might disagree with that, and that is a Pro Mag. Now, this is not for a Sig 226. This is actually a Sig 228 magazine. And I will probably do an addendum video for the Sig 228, even though it's very similar. I'll just mention a few differences and some philosophy differences. But the Pro Pro Mag magazine, in my experience, has been very reliable. And I don't know if I would carry this in a defensive situation where I really needed to have my magazine come through for me, but for range use, for goofing around, you betcha. And in a pinch, you could put it in there. All my buddies who've used Pro Mags have said the same thing, that indeed it's a very quality magazine, tempered steel body. The bluing on it is sometimes suspect. You might have, well, it's just not super. I've seen some Pro Mag magazines in the back that had rust spots coming down here, but they've always functioned for me. That's just Nutnfancy's experience. Of course, your mileage may vary. So that's the firepower issue. In comparison to the Glock, how does it do? It loses, let's be honest. But it doesn't lose by that much because we have a lot of magazine options for the Sig, including those outstanding 20-round magazines, which I just showed you. So that's going to bring us to one of my favorite subjects, and that's durability and reliability. We've talked a little bit about the pistol trials and what has been said about it. Also, a lot of people make some to-do about the Sig needing to have its recoil spring replaced every 5,000 rounds. You know, I searched Sig's website for that. I searched the manuals. Speaking of the manuals, this is what I'm talking about. That's the one the guy says came with his newer one, and the other owner said that's the one that came with his older one. So there's nothing in there that says you need to replace your magazine spring at your recoil spring at 5,000 rounds. Nothing in there. I didn't see anything on the website. I may have missed it. Again, I'm not the expert of all experts. You guys may know that. And you know what? I don't really care, to be honest. I just really don't. Do I think that I need to replace the recoil spring on a Sig every 5,000 rounds, and if I don't do it, I'm going to die? No, I don't. But that being said, it is cheap insurance. So to me, it's kind of a moot point. I don't even really want to waste time speaking about it. You know, if you feel like you need to do it, do it. You know, spend the few bucks to replace that spring if you feel like it. Buy some extras, keep them in storage. So that being said, I just kind of think of it as a non-issue. And I like my best information says that if those the frames of the Sig did fail, it was like around the 7,000 round point, and that's with no spring replacement at all. That's pretty darn good. I would venture to say everyone watching this video, probably 99% of you will never put over 5,000 rounds through your pistol. That's a pretty safe bet too, honestly, big time. Most people buy their gun, they're lucky if they shoot it once a year. Typically they're going to be shooting it maybe, I don't know, once every 2 years. That's a typical handgun owner, I think, in the U.S. Not too sure about, other countries, but that's just my take. So durability, again, let's bring the Glock 17 in the mix because that's its competition, has been for decades. The Glock 17 kind of wins in some ways. And let me keep going with this, though. The durability, I think the frame is very durable. The slide, as it's now manufactured, is extremely durable. Now it's milled out of a solid piece of stainless steel. This older Sig demonstrates how it used to be made, and this is the stamped steel slide that was mandrel hammered out and then pinned. But you know what? This was very effective. There were some complaints, I think, from the SEALs as they used this stamped steel slide in salt water. It was totally not impervious to salt water, and they had to detail strip it every time they took it for a swim. And I'll show you that in here in a sec. And they would have to just rinse the heck out of it, otherwise they were getting all kinds of rust. So, honestly speaking, the stamped steel slide is inferior to the now milled stainless steel slide. And let's look at those differences real quick. On the top strap, you can kind of see the older slide with its scallop area. See how that's milled? That's one way you can identify it. Not that you're going to see a lot of these older SIGs running around. You're just not. You'll be lucky if you ever see them, in fact. The ones that are still out there are usually being held as collectibles now since they're stamped with West German markings. And then on the side, basically the slides look very identical. This one's actually a little bit heavier. When you go with a milled block of stainless steel, it adds 1 more ounce to the gun. This is actually not quite 32 ounces. It's 31 ounces with a magazine in it. This one's 32. So the milled stainless steel slide is more durable, and the seals, I think, were the ones that really pushed that issue, and I can totally understand it because it's much more resistant to water. Now, since we went to a stainless steel slide, we also alleviated some of the rust issues on this old milled slide, which I have seen in this version of the Sig. This is not a rust-resistant finish on the Sig, and you will get rust on it if you do not totally keep up with the lubrication. In other words, put rim oil on it, maybe some CLP, break-free style, kind of along the lines of this, and keep it on the slide. And that way you won't, but it is somewhat maintenance intensive. Now, Sig has come out through the years with various coatings like Teflon and stuff like that, or Sig coat, I think they called it. But in my opinion, I think those wear off pretty quickly. Also, you can finish it with MP3, and there's all kinds of aftermarket coatings you can put on this slide if you were to own an older Sig, that you can alleviate that problem. But that's a problem. Now, the lower portion is, of course, aluminum, hard aluminum, and it is very durable. I haven't ever heard of any rust, or I'm sorry, corrosion issues on that. Very decent. But let's compare it again with its nemesis, the Glock 17. How does it compare for slide durability? There's no contest, at least with the older one. Actually, let's get the older one out of the mix and bring in the new one, because that's much more realistic. These two side by side, well, I guess it's more of a contest. I would still give the edge in, at least I'm talking slide durability here, I'd give the edge to Glock. With that Tenifer finish, it's just bulletproof. I mean, I've seen Glocks that are 20 years old that have been totally abused by their owners, and they have no rust on them whatsoever. And remember, that Tenifer finish goes through the metal. It's not an exterior finish like oftentimes is put on a stainless steel, like, you know, an oxide or nitron or whatever it is. It goes into the metal. So finish-wise on the slide, sorry, but Glock wins. Now, that being said, the Sig is still an outstanding design with that milled stainless steel design. Extremely durable. You'll fire thousands and thousands of rounds without experiencing a slide problem. They won't bust like the old M9s used to. The frame's strong. Yeah, if you want to, go ahead and replace that spring every 5,000 rounds, and you'll be double sure that your frame won't absorb any undue shock and crack on you. But it's extremely durable. And I would rank it maybe just a slight notch below the 17 in terms of durability, because I'm comparing metal against polymer. And I do think polymer actually is a tougher substance for handguns. That's right, you heard Nutnfancy say it first. Unless we're talking steel. Steel is steel, and it's awesome. But polymer just wears and wears. It just doesn't fatigue. Metal will fatigue. I don't care what kind of metal it is, eventually it will fatigue. I mean, maybe if we shot, I wonder, and I don't know the answer to this question, but what happens if we shoot 100,000 rounds through a Sig? You know, if you guys know of someone who's actually done it, I don't give a crap about internet rumor, I hate that. I'm talking factually, someone who's put 100,000 rounds and has recorded it for posterity, you know, let us know. I don't know of any. I do know for a fact that Glock 17 has. That there's Chuck Taylor's out there that has put over 100,000 rounds. And guess what? His gun, his 17, kept chugging away. That's why I say the Glock 17 is more durable. You know, can that? I know I was talking about the frame, saying, oh, 7,000 rounds. You know, you're good to that point. What I'm talking about is extended wear, way down the road. You know, tens of thousands of rounds. Would this aluminum frame hold up to the degree that a Glock's would? I don't know. But common sense and what I know about the two guns, I would say that this probably still maintains a slight edge in durability. That's just Nutnfancy's take. You know, if you guys disagree, I understand that. Let's talk about reliability. That's our next talking point here. I only got 30 seconds to the end of part 2, but I want to start it by saying the Glock 17 is extremely reliable, but this is one area. Let's put that mag back in. It looks better that way. By the way, that was safety checked as well. Let's do it again, just in case you doubt me. There you go. Feel better? This is one area I will say the Sig will take the Glock, and that is in reliability. Not by much, but it does. Tune into part 3 and you'll see what I'm talking about. Nothing fancy with a Sig 226.